one and all, my name is John Clare, this is John's Dark Art, and as always, you are very welcome. Now, today's episode is about a piece I call Ram Raid, and I'll bring up a few here now, and as you can see, it's just a picture of a ram's skull. Is there any specific meaning behind it? Not really. I just saw a skull and I thought it looked cool, so I thought I'd draw it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the process, and we're going to do that now. Okay, so here we are. We're in Procreate now. So I'm going to hit that button, and I'm going to hit that one there. And here we are. We are at Ram Raid. So what we're going to do now, first and foremost, we're going to go into our canvas information. This was done in the second. This has started on the 2nd of April. I think I finished it within a couple of weeks of me starting it. So I think it was finished back in April. I mean, the time I'm recording now is the 26th of July, I believe. So it was a couple of months ago I finished this piece off. And we're going into our statistics, a word I always seem to have trouble with. And you'll find out that I've done 4,705 strokes, and it took me a total of 15 hours and 46 minutes to do. Okay, so let's hop out of there now, and let's go into our time-lapse replays. And here we are. So the start of it, just draw a big C to indicate where the horns are. Those magnificent horns. And as you can see, I started drawing the skull, realised it was a bit too big, and through the wonders of working digitally, I was able to shrink it down and bring it back to what I thought at the time was the proper proportions. And just marked in where the second horn is on the other side, on the far side of the skull. So pull out a little bit there now. As I've said before, I know like with a lot of artists, what they'll do, especially if they're working digitally, they'll do a rough sketch, then they'll add on a layer, and then they'll do a finer sketch over the top of that to indicate where exactly their lines are. But it's just not the way I seem to work. Now, that's not to say that can't change over time, because I think if you're not evolving as an artist, at the very least, you're stagnating. So when you do come across better techniques, or you do come across ways of working that enable you to work in a better and more kind of efficient way, then great. But this is what works for me. So what I tend to do, like I said before, is I rough out my lines, and once I'm happy with the composition, I'll just go in with a technical pen brush, and I'll just clean up those lines, and then I'll finish it off. So anyway, here, let's punch in a little bit, because this is where the meat of the action is happening at the moment. Just doing my cross hatching. I think things like when it comes to my style of shading, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it cross hatching in the purest sense. I mean, like, it's not like I'm etching or I'm like very carefully marking my lines. What I tend to do is I tend to build my tone. So I'll do like a great examples in the eye here. So if we come in a little bit, you'll see basically I've done a little bit of directional shading there, and I've built up over the top of it, and then that kind of like a little area behind the eye where that kind of bone comes in and around. Yeah, I'm just kind of building up my tones, and I'm just kind of picking out a point and building out, and it's literally just like going backwards and forwards in different parts, building up, trying to get like a good idea of where it's like I'm mapping it out. I'm mapping out where the tones are. So continue doing that. And that's the thing, like the more tone I bring in, the more form I'm bringing forward. So the actual structure of the skull becomes more apparent as I'm shading it in. Also, when it comes to little details like the teeth there. The teeth are, I mean, if I pull it back a little bit, like the teeth are finicky little fecking things to draw. And, lots of little details. But, again, if you just take your time, you build up over it. Add tone where you need and take away tone where you don't need it to bring up highlights and that, then yeah, generally you're all right. The horns were a little bit more of a faff. So what I did there was I kind of built up loosely where the tone was so I could build up the forms. And then I started using my highlights to add in the details, well, my highlights and my contrasts. So like areas up here in the top of the skull here, this is where, because the nature of ram's horns are like, if we like scroll all the way through a little bit, you'll notice like they become wider and wider with time, like these little kind of sections here, whereas at the top of the horn they're a lot tighter. So whenever I've drawn ram's horns in the past, and I've drawn them a few times, so once I've got the form mapped out, then I start using highlight and contrast to kind of bring in the details. And that's all it really is throughout the duration of it. So any areas that I need to pick out highlights, I'll come in with my eraser brush, again using the exact same brush that I'm using. So if we hop out quickly, so if I'm go to my recents and we go to technical pencil, this will be the brush that I will be drawing in. Now if I go to my eraser and do the same thing here, and I use technical pencil, I'm using the exact same brush. And because I'm using the exact same brush, I have consistency with the mark making. So therefore it doesn't look weird then. So let's head back into the replay. Let's punch it forward as much as we can. Okay, so getting back to it, what I've done, roughly mapping it out using tone, and then kind of coming back over it again and kind of picking out all the little details and just having fun with it, really. I mean, that's the one thing you really got to kind of, I feel like you need to be able to do. I mean, it's an enjoyable process, just kind of getting into what was the name of the psychologist again who came up with it? I remember watching it was Jamie Windsor video that I first kind of encountered this, where he talks about flow. If you haven't seen it, if you can check it out, do it. It's brilliant. Where he talks about how this Czech psychologist discovered something called flow, where like most creative people, whether you're an artist or a musician or whatever, what they'll do is you get into this kind of the flow state, and where you just kind of like end up losing yourself in the piece. And I think this is one of the ones where I actually did that quite well. It did help that I was streaming at the time, so I had my set times. And once I kind of got over the inertia of starting, and then you kind of allow yourself to enter the flow state, then that's what happened here. Literally, I was just kind of losing myself in the mark making, in the drawing, in the process of creation. So if we come back here a little bit again, like, so what I've done is I've picked out all the highlights, and then I've kind of built back over the top of it with more shading to kind of give the illusion of shadow. Because the thing is, like, areas that are in dark are not necessarily all black. You know, there are still details to be picked out of. I mean, I mentioned it in the previous episode. I still haven't looked it up, if I'm being honest, but I think it's called specular highlights. So what happens here with specular highlights is in areas that are dark, light kind of still, like, there's still kind of subliminal light picking out forms and picking out details. And if you kind of, if you allow yourself to, you can still see those details, and you can then transfer them into your drawing. And it also gives a lot more depth, and it makes it look a lot more convincing, I think, anyway. I mean, I'm sure there's others that might feel differently. But yeah, so picking out all the details, shading it in, and I think that's pretty much it. That's Ram Raid. So I think we'll start rounding this out now, shall we? Okay, so that was Ram Raid. Fairly uncomplicated piece, in fairness, but we'll talk about that now in a minute, once we get the sales pitch out of the way. So yeah, this is up for sale on the website, www.johnsdarkart.com. It'll be available in two sizes. A3, that'll be at €75, and A4, that'll be at €45. So if you'd like to go over to the website, www.johnsdarkart.com, pick yourself up a print, help support what we're doing, be very much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so again, look, I'm going to be straight. This drawing here is more what you might call a practice piece. It's something I did to be doing something, because I think the phrase that I like to use quite a lot, I think I've mentioned it again in the previous video, is inspiration is something that finds you working. Now, unfortunately, over the last couple of weeks, I haven't really been doing much streaming or anything like that, because my wrist has been absolutely banjaxed. So in terms of being able to do any drawing for any length of time, forget about it. I'm right-handed, I draw with my right hand, my right hand's not working, so I can't draw. So I haven't been creating anything. And as soon as I am able, I intend to rectify that. But the problem, this is the thing, sometimes you just need to, start something. And I know I've spoken to other artists over the years who've encountered similar sort of problems. There's nothing more terrifying than a white piece of paper or a blank canvas, but you can't find anything to fill that page with. I think sometimes you just need to do it. Whether or not it's any good or not is really not the point. It's just to be doing something. Because the thing is, if you're waiting for inspiration, I've always found this anyway, if I'm sitting around waiting for inspiration to strike, I might as well be waiting till the day I die, then, because it'll never come. But if I'm just doing something, like if I'm doing a piece like this where it's just like really more of a practice piece, it's like I like drawing skulls, I like drawing ram skulls, so why not just draw a ram skull, you know? And maybe I could use this as part of a greater piece further down the line. I've spoke about that in previous videos also. That could be an element in something else. Maybe it won't be, but that's not really the point. The point is to be making, the point is to be creating. The point is to be getting into that state of flow. But that's the thing, is like usually the problem with the state of flow, it doesn't come straight away. It's almost like when you start, there's this sense of inertia. It's something you've got to work through, so you can basically turn your conscious mind off and let your subconscious just get on with the important processes. More often than not, if you're creating something, other ideas will come, and then one idea flows into another idea and can then lead to bigger and better pieces. So I think it's just a case of like, don't be intimidated by a blank piece of paper or a blank song sheet or a blank anything. Like, fill it. That's what it's there to do. It's a vector for your creativity. But if you're not utilizing it, then you're not fulfilling its purpose, and you're not fulfilling your purpose as a creative. So the best thing to do is just do, you know, as Nike says, just do it. So just crack on, get on with it, get drawing. If you can't find the time, make the time. If you're working a long shift, but you feel yourself to be a creative person, you want to do some drawing or something else like along those lines, then maybe come home, have a shower, have your dinner. Instead of sitting down and playing PlayStation or Xbox, give yourself an hour and then play your Xbox or PlayStation. You know, I'm not saying don't play video games. I love video games. Video games are awesome. I think these should be outlets for when you've got literally nothing else to do, or better yet, as a reward for doing something. So if you allow yourself an hour to be creative, and then you want to turn around and say, I want to watch a movie or watch a TV series or play a video game, do it as a reward for being creative. Make the time. Just make the time. Make the time, sit down and create. And if the blank page is intimidating you, just get a pencil and just mark it. Have a go at it. And then before you know it, you're creating, you're drawing, and you're fulfilling something. Because the worst thing in the world, right, that I've encountered, there's no lower feeling than sitting around feeling that you should be creating something and you're not. And I could offer you any number of tips and bits of advice to circumvent those problems, and there are plenty of them out there. I mean, on this platform alone, if you search on YouTube, there'll be other creative people, much like myself, saying very, very similar things. And I think it's advice that's worth taking up. But the thing is, whatever you do, don't allow yourself to make excuses. Don't excuse yourself for not feeling creative. Oh, I didn't feel like it today. I didn't feel inspired. Inspiration is something that finds you working. If you're not doing it, you'll never find it. So make the time, get creating, and put it out in the world in whatever way you see fit. Anyway, my name's been John Clow. This has been John's Dark Art. And as always, you have been very welcome. Till next time.